When we think about the Harry Potter series, we typically focus on the magic, the adventure, and the grandness of the wizarding world. But sometimes we forget where the series started. There is something deeply unsettling about the very beginning of Harry's story, the place where he spent his formative years shaped by people who despised him for what he was. The Dursley family has become somewhat of a punchline in the Harry Potter fandom. They're portrayed as cartoonishly obsessed with normalcy. Their bigotry is played for laughs, and their cruelty is sometimes presented as almost comic relief. And yet, when you look closely at their actions across all 7 books, something darker emerges. What we're looking at isn't just a dysfunctional family. We're looking at abuse, years of trauma, and the collateral damage of fear and ignorance. Welcome to Movie Flame, I'm Morgan Ross, and today we're going to do a deep dive into the Dursley family, taking a look at their behavior, their mindset, and their way of life. My research stemmed from not just the 7 books, but extended lore outside of the novels as well. I dug up many writings that J.K. Rowling had made about the Dursley family, which adds so much more to their narrative. So stay until the end of the video to learn more about their abuse of Harry, learn about how Marge Dursley played a part in his abuse, and to discover what the 3 main members of the family truly represent. If you enjoy this video, please consider liking and sharing. It will greatly help to grow and sustain the channel. I also put a ton of work into this video. It was months in the making, so sharing, liking, and commenting would help boost it so as many people as possible could see it. Now, let's get into it. The Dursleys live on Privet Drive, a street that exists in complete contrast to the magical world. Their home is described as perfectly normal, perfectly ordered, and perfectly unremarkable. And this is precisely what the Dursleys want. This is who they are. Vernon worked for a company that made drills, a basic straightforward company that manufactured basic straightforward products. He dressed in boring ties, he complained about mundane things, and he represented the absolute epitome of middle-class conformity. But the Dursleys didn't just want to be normal. They were obsessed with the appearance of normalcy. They were so obsessed with how things looked that they were willing to lock a child away and starve him rather than risk anyone finding out the truth. Their entire worldview was built on the foundation that different equals dangerous. But why were the Dursleys so hostile toward magic? Why was the thought of a wizard in the house so horrifying to them that they would abuse a child to prevent it? Well, I think the answer lies in fear. The Dursleys weren't just bigoted, they were terrified. They didn't understand magic, and they couldn't control it. And so, like many people throughout history, they reacted to their fear with hatred and rejection. Vernon could not accept that magic existed because accepting it would mean admitting that the world was far more complicated, far more wondrous, and far more uncontrollable than he could bear. And Petunia rejected magic because she felt rejected by it. She had hoped to be a part of the magical world as a child, and when she wasn't chosen, she buried that hope under layers of resentment and denial. And rather than accept this reality, they chose to punish the living embodiment of it. J.K. Rowling wrote this family as a satire of middle-class stereotypes who have a desperate need to maintain social status. Vernon competed with other men on how wealthy or how nice their things were. Meanwhile, Petunia spent her life spying on the neighbors, not out of genuine curiosity, but out of a need to judge them. The Dursleys are not portrayed as evil masterminds. They're portrayed as small, petty, frightened people who clung to the only identity they understood: being normal and being respected. The satire becomes more serious when you take a deeper look though. As I said earlier, the Dursleys' treatment of Harry mirrors real-world discrimination based on fear and ignorance. Throughout history, people have been persecuted for being different. They've been told that they're not normal, told that their existence is a threat, and told that they need to hide who they are or face punishment. They've been locked away, starved, beaten, and told it was for their own good, or for the good of society. I think the Dursleys honestly believed that they were helping society by trying to squash the magic out of Harry. They believed that if they punished, starved, and isolated him enough, they could make him normal. This is what makes them so sinister though. They were ordinary people committing extraordinary cruelty in the name of what they thought created normalcy. Before we dive into the individual members of the Dursley family, we need to confront the central reality of Harry's childhood. He was abused. Not metaphorically, not in some abstract sense. He was physically abused, emotionally abused, and neglected by the people responsible for his care. This needs to be stated clearly because, as I said earlier, there's a tendency in the fandom to treat the Dursleys' cruelty as somewhat comedic. But when I read through all of the details chronologically, the picture that emerged was deeply disturbing. Harry's physical circumstances at the Dursley household were dire. He slept in the cupboard under the stairs, literally treated like an object to be stored away. And when they finally moved him to a bedroom, it was only because they feared magical repercussions from those sending the Hogwarts letters. And the wild thing is that this room was there all his life. They willingly decided to put him in the cupboard, allowing Dudley to have 2 rooms. One for sleeping, and one just for his toys. Toys that Harry was never gifted nor allowed to play with. And the cupboard under the stairs deserves a little more attention. Even years after they let him leave the cupboard, later when Harry returns to the Dursleys with information about the Wizarding World, that being his Wizarding School books, his broomstick, and a few other things, the cupboard becomes relevant again because they lock all of it away in the same place where they locked Harry away. It is their way of reminding Harry of his place. And at the end of the series, when Harry leaves the Dursleys for the last time, he reflects when looking at the cupboard under the stairs. He thinks about how the Dursleys had shut him up, locked him away, and kept him out of sight, all for the crime of being a wizard. Harry was also never given his own clothes. He only got Dudley's, which hung off his small frame because Dudley was so much larger. His glasses were held together with tape after being repeatedly broken by Dudley's punches. He was also consistently underfed, particularly during Dudley's diet in the Goblet of Fire, where Harry was given significantly less food than his cousin. Luckily, his wizarding friends helped him with that and sent him loads of food. But the Dursleys didn't know that and willingly let him not have enough to eat. Harry was so underfed that later in life, while out hunting Horcruxes, Harry could survive long periods without food because he had endured periods of near starvation at the Dursleys. This is the lasting damage of prolonged malnutrition during his childhood, which can literally be defined as child abuse. Furthermore, while Vernon and Petunia gave Dudley the biggest and best things they could find, they did the complete opposite for Harry. For Harry's 10th birthday, the Dursleys gave him a coat hanger and a pair of Vernon's old socks. There were no real gifts, no cake, and no acknowledgement that this birthday mattered. They even forgot his birthday entirely on multiple occasions. And when he was at Hogwarts for Christmas, they sent him a single tissue, which he described as an all-time low. It honestly would have been nicer to just not send him anything. Going out of their way to send this, rather than just ignoring him, shows that they actively enjoyed and went out of their way to try and upset their nephew. Another more cruel way in which they did this was when they took Harry to King's Cross for the first time. Harry thought that they were being uncharacteristically nice, but it became clear why as soon as they dropped him off. They knew that there was no such thing as platform 9 3/4, and they only drove him so that they could drop him off, laugh at him, and leave him there all alone with nowhere to go. Harry had also never been given pocket money for 10 years, while Dudley was given all the money he wanted. Petunia and Vernon also opted not to teach Harry how to swim, while they paid for Dudley to have swimming lessons. And this came with a disturbing thought from Harry. Harry thought that this was them hoping he might drown one day and they'd be done with him. Harry was also never taken on holiday. His life was spent either at school, in Mrs. Figg's house, or in the Dursleys, where he occupied the lowest possible position in the family hierarchy. And now we have to look at the physical abuse that took place in their home, because it wasn't just neglect, there was active violence. Dudley and his gang engaged in what they called Harry hunting, which involved them chasing Harry with the explicit intention of beating him up. And as said, Dudley punched Harry so frequently that his glasses were always broken, and even worse, his nose was broken repeatedly. He was hit, kicked, and bullied, while the adults in his life did nothing to stop it. And one might argue that that was just kids being kids. However, it wasn't just Dudley. Vernon physically abused Harry as well. Harry said several times that he had to actively remain out of arm's reach from his uncle because it was a regular occurrence that he would punch or grab Harry. And at the beginning of the 5th book, he actually grabbed Harry by the throat and strangled him, all because he thought Harry used magic outside of their home where the neighbors might have seen it. Strangulation is child abuse taken to the highest level, literally making it so the child might not be able to breathe. And this was mild compared to the thoughts that Vernon had about Harry that go well past just physical abuse. He hated Harry so much that he actively wanted him to die. When he found out that Harry got in trouble with the ministry, the book reads, "Do your lot have the death penalty?" he added as a hopeful afterthought. And when Harry said he would have a hearing, Vernon said, "I won't give up hope then." This makes the physical abuse he inflicts on Harry very scary, because there's really no limit on how badly Vernon would hurt him, because he already wishes that Harry were dead. And Petunia physically abused Harry as well, one time swinging a frying pan at Harry's head. He was able to duck, but Petunia's intention was there. A frying pan is a very heavy object that could have seriously injured Harry, especially with a blow to the head. And if she did it so casually here, she definitely did it other times that we just didn't hear about. The violence that Harry sustained was so bad that he had to actively create survival strategies to avoid abuse. He got faster to avoid danger, and he kept a significant distance between all of them and himself, ensuring that they couldn't put their hands on him. And then there's Marge Dursley, Vernon's sister, who added to the abuse as well. She hit the 4-year-old Harry with a walking stick just to prevent him from beating Dudley at musical chairs. Another time, she gifted Dudley a toy robot and gave Harry a dog biscuit, basically implying that he was nothing more than a pet to the family. And honestly, she treated her dogs way better than Harry was ever treated while at the Dursleys. And speaking of her dogs, one day, Marge had her dog go after Harry, and he had to run up into a tree so that the dog could not get to him and bite him. And she refused to call him off until well past midnight, leaving Harry terrified and trapped in the tree for hours. She literally sicked her dog on him to the point that Harry feared for his life, which no child should ever have to do. And do you know what the Dursleys did? They laughed. Those hours of Harry being up in the tree were hilarious to them. And this abuse stretched even further than that, as they actually imprisoned Harry. When Vernon learned that Harry could not use magic outside of school, the book said that he laughed like a maniac. He had realized that he could go back to controlling Harry through fear. Vernon locked him in his bedroom with bars on the window, and he added a cat flap in the door for food. They only gave Harry 3 meals a day, each one being one pathetic bowl of cold stone soup, which he had to share with Hedwig. And he was only allowed to leave his room twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening, which was the only time he was allowed to use the bathroom. Criminals in jail cells at least have a toilet where they can go whenever they need to, but Harry wasn't even given that luxury. This was so bad that Harry actually wondered if he would even be alive in 4 weeks' time, which is absolutely insane. Harry was almost treated like a slave in this house as well. The Dursleys forced him to cook, clean, and do chores that they did not want to do, and he of course got no reward for this. The crazy thing is that Harry lived a similar life to a house elf like Dobby. He was forced to do chores, he was physically abused if he messed up, and he was forced to wear clothes that didn't suit him. A child being able to be compared to the slaves of the wizarding world is a scary thought. But perhaps more damaging than the physical abuse was the psychological torment. First off, Harry was never allowed to ask questions, and the one time they allowed it, they lied to him about how his parents died, telling him that they died in a car crash rather than acknowledging the truth. They also cut his hair to make him almost bald, knowing that this would lead to humiliation at school. And when it grew back overnight with accidental magic, they punished him for it. And it gets worse. When the Dursleys spoke about Harry, they often did so as though he weren't there, and they referred to him as it, or describing him as something very nasty, like a slug or an object rather than a child. They also had no trace that he even existed in that house. They had loads of pictures of Dudley as well as their family, but not a single one of Harry. In fact, I would guess that Harry was never photographed, probably except for school photos, which obviously the Dursleys never wanted. This means that it's quite possible that Harry had never seen a photo of himself in his life. And while that was his home life, school wasn't any better. Dudley tormented Harry and turned everyone in the school against him, ensuring that Harry had no friends. No one wanted to be associated with Harry because they knew that Dudley hated him, and everyone did what Dudley wanted because of his bullying ways. So Harry was isolated not just at home, but at school as well. Hagrid was literally the first friend he ever had in his life when he rescued him from the Dursleys, and he was 11 years old at that point. Think about that. He had no friends, no one to talk to, and no one who liked him for 11 years. The amount of trauma that could cause a child could lead to irreparable damage. In the book, it also says that the Dursleys prevented Harry from engaging in any activities that might bring him joy. He wasn't allowed to watch the television programs he wanted. He couldn't play on Dudley's computer or with his toys. He wasn't allowed to read books for pleasure, and he wasn't allowed to have hobbies or interests. And this was made even worse because it was waved in his face that Dudley could do all of these things as he wished, while Harry could not. When Harry went to the zoo with the Dursleys, which was one of the first times he was ever allowed to go somewhere fun, Harry was excited that he got something from the ice cream truck before the Dursleys could stop the woman from asking him what he wanted. And even then, they got him the cheapest thing, a simple lemon ice pop. Petunia and Vernon had planned on getting Dudley and his friend Pierce an ice cream cone and had no intention to get Harry anything. Harry getting that much joy and excitement out of something so small that every kid should be able to have on a regular basis is truly sad. And even more, Petunia and Vernon destroyed Harry's character to everyone in the neighborhood, as well as to Aunt Marge, by telling them that Harry went to St. Brutus's Secure Center for Incurably Criminal Boys, painting the picture that Harry was a terrible person, when really, it was the opposite. This made the neighborhood be terrified of that Potter boy, who parents had warned their kids about. Because of the Dursleys, Harry was seen as a hardened hooligan who attended a school for criminals. Looking at all of this, there's one question that haunts Harry's story when you look at his time at the Dursleys. How did he not become an Obscurial? In the wizarding world, an Obscurial is a young wizard or witch who has developed a dark, parasitical magical force as a result of their magic being suppressed through psychological or physical abuse. The magic, unable to express itself, naturally turns inward and becomes destructive and dangerous. Examples of this are Ariana Dumbledore and Credence Barebone. Ariana, Albus Dumbledore's sister, faced trauma from a one-off incident when she was attacked by 3 Muggle boys. Meanwhile, Harry went through abuse all day, every day, for a decade. Then Credence went through something very similar to what Harry went through, as his adoptive mother physically and mentally abused him if he showed signs of magic. But yet, Harry never became an Obscurial despite similar situations of magic being suppressed, being punished when he did use magic, and having someone attempt to beat the magic out of him. Now, the realistic answer as to why Harry never became an Obscurial is because J.K. Rowling just didn't create the idea of Obscurials until the end of the series or even after, meaning she had no idea that Harry would fall under this category when she wrote the original books. But either way, it's an interesting thing to think about. It's scary how the Dursleys' abuse could have transformed him into a monster rather than a hero. There's also a theory out there that the Dursleys were so horrible because they were affected by the Horcrux inside of Harry, because as we saw in the Deathly Hallows, a Horcrux can really affect how a person acts. However, I don't think that this is the case for the Dursleys. For one, we saw in the first chapter that the Dursleys were like this before Harry was in their lives, McGonagall even commenting on how awful they were.
I've watched them all day. They're the worst sort of muggles imaginable.
And two, Ron and Hermione probably would have been affected the same way, not to mention the other boys who lived in the dormitory with Harry. They were all with him for almost an entire year for 6 different years, but none of them were ever affected. I think the Dursleys were just awful people who treated Harry horribly. And this is one thing about the Harry Potter books that always felt off to me, how Harry's trauma was never really explored. Anyone who went through what he went through while growing up should have been shattered in the mind. Of all the members in the Dursley family, Vernon is the most resistant to any kind of growth or redemption. He is by almost any measure a terrible person. And unlike Petunia or Dudley, there is very little complexity to his villainy. Vernon is simply cruel, bigoted, and cowardly just because that's the way he is. Vernon's defining characteristic is that he is a bully. He bullies Harry relentlessly, he bullies wizards whenever he encounters them, he bullies his employees, and he enjoys shouting at people just in general. His entire worldview is built on the hierarchy that he sits at the top looking down with contempt at everyone beneath him, at least in his mind. Vernon's bullying nature is on full display in pretty much every scene he's in. When he finds out that the Weasleys are coming to Privet Drive to pick Harry up for the Quidditch World Cup, Vernon puts on his best suit, not to be welcoming, but to look impressive and intimidating, and just to rub it in their face that he has more wealth than them. He treats their arrival as almost a threat to his territory, and that's important. When Vernon was confronted by the Order of the Phoenix about his treatment of Harry while at King's Cross, his immediate response was to try and be intimidating, claiming that what he does in his own house was his business, and he refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. However, when Vernon was confronted by someone with actual power, he collapsed. Vernon questioned if Mad-Eye Moody was threatening him, and Moody confirmed that yes, he was indeed. Then, when he showed Vernon his magical eye, it made Vernon's cowardice come out. He leaped backwards in horror and embarrassingly collided with the luggage trolley. In a similar situation, Arthur Weasley questioned his treatment of Harry, this time actually in Vernon's own home. When Harry said goodbye to the Dursleys, they said nothing back, which made Mr. Weasley step up. "You aren't going to see your nephew till next summer," he said to Uncle Vernon in mild indignation. "Surely you're going to say goodbye." Uncle Vernon's face worked furiously, but Mr. Weasley's wand was still in his hand, and Uncle Vernon's tiny eyes darted to it at once before he said very resentfully, "Goodbye then." Vernon was once again intimidated into doing something he did not want to do by the kind of people he hated most, and they forced him to be kind to the actual person he hated most in the world. And this cowardice comes out more than he would like it to, and far more than he would ever admit. When Dumbledore visits, Vernon loses the ability to speak. When Harry points a wand at him, he backs down. When Hagrid threatens him, he hides in the corner. This makes it clear that Vernon's bullying is based on a power imbalance. He bullies people who he believes he can control. Children, his employees, and wizards who follow social conventions and try to be polite, like Arthur Weasley. And this really shows how pathetic Vernon really is. Throughout the series, Vernon exhibits what we might call small man syndrome. There was a moment between Vernon and James Potter where James made fun of Vernon. When Vernon asked what kind of car he drove, trying to one-up James, James described his racing broom. Then when Vernon tried to say that wizards didn't make any money, James mentioned the pile of gold he had in his wizarding bank while laughing. Vernon, not having a comeback and knowing that he had lost, did what any small man would do. He ran away and stormed out. And he did not forget this, clearly obsessing over this moment, because at his and Petunia's wedding, he made sure that James was in earshot as he called James an amateur magician to a bunch of their guests. This was his way of trying to make up for being outdone in their last exchange. Vernon was also kind of happy when James, along with Lily, died, saying that the world was better off without them. No doubt, this stemmed from the jealousy and spitefulness he had for James after he felt slighted by him. Vernon could never let this small moment go because it bruised his fragile ego. And he took this so far that he was sort of pleased about someone dying, which is some real psychopath stuff. Vernon's second defining characteristic is materialism. He measures the world in terms of money, status, and possessions. A great example of this is when Vernon got a new car, and he had Dudley and Petunia come out to admire it very loudly so that all of the neighbors would hear. Vernon was also thrilled when the Dursleys were shortlisted for the All England Best Kept Suburban Lawn competition, because it was a mark of status to him. But how did he get such a nice lawn? Well, he used loads of water to water his grass while they were in a serious drought. He cared more about his lawn being the best than he cared about the seriousness of the situation that the country was in. And the little bit about the All England Best Kept Suburban Lawn competition is hilarious, because that competition did not exist. Vernon left arrogantly to go claim his prize, only to find out that he was tricked by wizards, the people he hated most, who then broke into his house to rescue his nephew. But getting back to his materialistic nature, this materialism extends to how Vernon treats his family. Dudley receives everything he wants: computers, video games, expensive toys, because his possessions are a reflection of Vernon's status. Harry, on the other hand, receives nothing. To Vernon, Harry is an expense, a drain of resources. Harry produces nothing, contributes nothing to Vernon's image, and exists only as a burden. But then, in The Half-Blood Prince, all of a sudden, when Vernon found out that Harry was left an entire house by his godfather Sirius, he looked at Harry differently. His small eyes narrowed with greed. He all of a sudden took interest in Harry's life for maybe the first time ever, because Harry finally had something that could increase his status. Vernon is a man who thinks the world revolves around him. And this is clear when it came time for the Dursleys to go into hiding in the final book. Vernon requested to be guarded by Kingsley Shacklebolt, one of the only wizards he ever took to, simply because he was able to blend into the Muggle world better than any wizard he had ever met. However, Harry told him that he was guarding the Minister of Magic, and Vernon responded saying, "Exactly, he's the best." This says a lot about him. He thinks he's more important than possibly the most important person in all of the wizarding world. Vernon's view of the establishment is also something worth mentioning. Vernon demanded the protection of the wizarding government when he was told that Harry was putting them in danger. It was so very typical of his uncle to put his hopes in the establishment, even within this world that he despised and mistrusted. Now, because this video is a deep dive, I decided to dive a little deeper into Vernon. There was one question that came to my head when studying him. Where did he come from, and how did he become this way? We learn very little about Vernon's background from the books, but what we do know is significant. Vernon had a sister, Marge Dursley, who was every bit as cruel and prejudiced as he was. If we assume they were raised by the same parents, it's reasonable to conclude that Vernon learned his bullying ways, his cruelty, and his bigotry from his family of origin. Vernon and Marge's parents were likely bullies as well. And so, if this is true, both he and Marge became exactly what their parents modeled them to be. And this cycle continued as Dudley took after his father. This idea is really brought forth when Dumbledore visited the Dursleys, and while there, he suggests that Vernon caused harm to Dudley because of the example he set through his actions as his father. The best that can be said is that he has at least escaped the appalling damage you have inflicted upon the unfortunate boy sitting between you. Both Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon looked around instinctively, as though expecting to see someone other than Dudley squeezed between them. Us? Mistreat Dudders? What do you... began Uncle Vernon furiously. But there's a crucial difference between Vernon and Dudley. Dudley eventually broke the cycle. As he got older, as he was forced to experience the consequences of his actions, he began to change. He became less like his parents and more like his own person. Vernon, on the other hand, never changed. He never questioned his beliefs, he never reflected on his actions, he was incapable of growth. This is what makes Vernon truly evil in a way that Petunia and Dudley were not. He's not a victim of circumstance or of his own suppressed emotions. He's someone who has chosen over and over again to be cruel and selfish. And because of that, he became a small, pathetic man. If Vernon represents unredeemable cruelty, then Petunia represents something far more complex, a person twisted by jealousy and fear. She's driven by suppressed love and buried hope, and is capable of both extraordinary cruelty and genuine sacrifice. Petunia is perhaps the most interesting character in the Dursley family, because her story, when fully explored, is genuinely tragic. To understand Petunia, we need to go back to her childhood. We need to understand what it was like to grow up alongside a sister who was magical and special, who was handpicked to go to a school of magic and went on to live in a world of wonder and possibility. Meanwhile, Petunia was left behind. When Lily received her Hogwarts letter, Petunia wanted to go too. She actually wrote to Albus Dumbledore begging him to let her attend Hogwarts, but obviously she couldn't because she wasn't a witch, which Dumbledore told her very nicely. Even so, this must have been devastating for Petunia. In her head, she was basically told that she wasn't special enough nor worthy enough to do what she truly wanted to do, and that her younger sister was granted to do. And so, Petunia developed a story to protect herself. She decided that magic wasn't wonderful, it was freakish. That witches and wizards weren't special, they were abnormal. That Hogwarts wasn't a school of wonder, it was a school for freaks. She needed to convince herself that she had never actually wanted it, and that she was better off being normal. This is the foundation of Petunia's entire personality. She has a desperate need to reframe rejection as superiority, and she has a need to convince herself that being left out was actually a blessing in disguise. But Petunia's jealousy wasn't just about being left out of Hogwarts. It was about her sister being special in a way that she could never be. Throughout their childhood, Petunia watched as her parents fawned over Lily. Lily this and Lily that. They were proud of having a witch in the family. Interestingly, Petunia actually felt exactly how Harry felt with Dudley. Dudley was always favored, and in Petunia's head, Lily was always favored. It's fascinating that Petunia essentially created an environment that broke her as a kid. Petunia watched as Lily made friends in the wizarding world, fell in love with a fellow wizard, and built a life that was separate from hers. A life that Petunia could never fully enter or understand. And so, Petunia buried herself in the normal world. She pursued a typing course, she met and married Vernon, and built a life of perfect normalcy and, in her eyes, respectability. And she told herself that she was happy. However, the jealousy was still there even years later, which was perfectly displayed at her wedding, a scene we learn about in deeper Harry Potter lore that goes past the books. Petunia decided not to make Lily a bridesmaid at her wedding because she was tired of being overshadowed by her. Clearly, that envy was still there. Petunia's need for everything in her house to be spotless or for her cake to be perfect down to the last detail is something that clearly shows her obsessive need to control things. Every night, she does a pre-bedtime wipe down of all of the kitchen surfaces. She disliked animals because they made her house dirty. She winced when Ripper, Marge's dog, spilled and dropped things on her clean floor. And she would physically hurt herself at times, chewing on her tongue very aggressively when things were not in perfect order. And worse than a dog being in her house was having the house elf creature there. And Petunia let out a hair-raising shriek. Nothing this filthy had entered her house in living memory. and she came to an anxiety boiling point when her living room fell victim to a literal explosion after Arthur Weasley blasted their fireplace. And I think the reason why Petunia was the way she was about this is because she felt there was very little she could control about her childhood when Lily was getting the spotlight. So in adulthood, the one thing she could control was making her house flawless. But with this came a huge amount of anxiety that was clearly sparked by severe OCD. Petunia did attempt to reconcile with her sister, showcasing that she still had love for Lily. I mentioned this earlier, but she and Vernon went out with Lily and James, and it ended in Vernon and Petunia storming out. Not because the girls made this decision, but because the men did after James made fun of Vernon. When Petunia was told to leave with her husband, Lily was left in tears. Lily always wanted to be close to her sister, but Petunia never allowed this to happen. The last correspondence the two sisters had was Lily sending Petunia a birth announcement for Harry, which Petunia immediately threw in the trash. When Lily and James died, Dumbledore told Mrs. Dursley that Harry's safety depended on him living with her because she shared her sister's blood, thus enacting magic through the power of love that would protect Harry. He told Petunia that if she didn't do this, Lily's sacrifice would have been for nothing. Interestingly, Petunia never mentioned anything about this protection to her husband, which was rare because they were almost always on the same page and actually had a really good marriage despite being terrible people. They were always supportive, kind, and loving of each other. Going back to their early relationship, Petunia was terrified to tell Vernon that she had a witch for a sister, thinking that Vernon would leave her. However, he did not. When Rowling went into more detail about the couple past the books, she wrote, "He told Petunia solemnly that he would never hold it against her that she had a freak for a sister, and Petunia threw herself upon him in such violent gratitude that he dropped his battered sausage." That's why it's so shocking that Petunia kept this from Vernon. Petunia took Harry in, but she did so grudgingly. She made sure that he knew he was unwanted, that he was a burden, and that he was less than her own son. But yet, she kept him alive. She fed him enough, though barely. She provided him with a roof over his head, and she did not throw him out on the streets. In the Order of the Phoenix, even when Vernon wanted to do so following the Dementor attack, Petunia still said no. Granted, this was following a threat from Dumbledore that was sent in a howler, but she still made the choice to allow Harry to stay. One scene that I was excited to dissect for this video was the scene where Petunia learns that Voldemort is back. Here, she goes against what has been her personality and stance for years, and she doesn't dismiss it. She doesn't pretend that Voldemort being back doesn't matter. She repeats the word, "back?" with genuine fear. She then looked at Harry as she had never looked at him before, and all of a sudden, for the very first time in his life, Harry fully appreciated that Aunt Petunia was his mother's sister. He could not have said why this hit him so very powerfully at this moment. All he knew was that he was not the only person in the room who had an inkling of what Voldemort being back might mean. Aunt Petunia had never in her life looked at him like that before. Her large pale eyes, so unlike her sisters, were not narrowed in dislike or anger. They were wide and fearful. The furious pretense that Aunt Petunia had maintained all of Harry's life, that there was no magic and no world other than the world she inhabited with Uncle Vernon, seemed to have fallen away. This shows that Petunia was upset that the man that killed her sister had returned from the dead. That facade that she had put up, the facade that she had used to convince herself that she didn't want to be a part of Lily's life in the Wizarding World, faltered for the first time in years. She did not want this man to be alive. She clearly wanted him dead for what he had done to her little sister. I think this is a really important moment in her character arc that not many people talk about. There is actually a scene in the movies, well, a deleted scene, which conveys this moment perfectly.
Do you think I don't know what they're capable of? You didn't just lose a mother that night in Godric's Hollow, you know. I lost a sister.
Instead of being in the 5th installment though, it was in the last. Going back to the book though, this moment where Petunia's facade is lowered houses another moment that is vital to understanding just how much the Wizarding World meant to her. When she was a child, she had been spying on Lily and Severus Snape before they went to Hogwarts, and she overheard them talking about Dementors and Azkaban. Now, many decades later, when Vernon asked Harry what Dementors were, Petunia, without thinking, said that they were the guards of the wizard prison Azkaban. When she said it, she clapped her hand over her mouth as though she had cursed, realizing that she had just led on to how much the wizarding world actually meant to her and how badly she wanted to be a part of it. Remembering these tiny little details for multiple decades, not to mention the complex names and words that are very far from Muggle vocabulary, shows that she hung on to every detail she found out about the world she always dreamed of being a part of, but never could. At the end of the series, when Harry says goodbye to his aunt and uncle for the last time, Petunia has a moment where it seems as though she might finally say something that acknowledges what was always between herself and Harry. She said, "Well, goodbye," and marched toward the door without looking at him. "Goodbye," said Harry. She stopped and looked back. For a moment, Harry had the strangest feeling that she wanted to say something to him. She gave him an odd, tremulous look and seemed to teeter on the edge of speech. But then, with a little jerk of her head, she bustled out of the room after her husband and son. This was left up for speculation about what she would have said or what she was thinking in that moment. But in deeper Harry Potter lore, Rowling actually answered that question for us in an extended piece of writing about Vernon and Petunia. She wrote, "I wanted to suggest in the final book that something decent, a long forgotten but dimly burning love for her sister, the realization that she might never see Lily's eyes again, almost struggled out of Aunt Petunia when she said goodbye to Harry for the last time, but that she was not able to admit it or show those long buried feelings." In that moment, Petunia almost admitted the truth and let go of the bitterness she held for years, and acknowledged the love she had for Lily, but she couldn't do it. She was too broken, too damaged, too stuck in the patterns she had created for herself. This is what makes Petunia so tragic. She can't quite reach redemption, even in the end. Later on, we learn that Petunia actually saved the blanket that Harry was wrapped in when he was left on their doorstep. She kept it his whole life and left it to him when she died. It's not much, but it's another example that shows there is kindness and compassion in there somewhere. Of all of the Dursleys, Dudley's arc is the most hopeful. He is the only character who experiences genuine redemption and becomes a genuinely better person by the end of the series. But Dudley's story is complicated because we have to acknowledge that Dudley is also a victim. He was a child ruined by his parents, as Dumbledore pointed out to Petunia and Vernon. All of the awful traits he has were a product of his environment. When we first meet Dudley as a kid, he is perhaps one of the most obnoxious children in literature. He's spoiled, cruel, and lazy. He gets whatever he wants, and his parents obsessively dote on him. They call him ridiculous nicknames like Popkins, Sweetums, Dudders, and Duddykins. In the first book on his birthday, Dudley receives multiple expensive gifts like computers, video games, remote control airplanes, gold wristwatches, and racing bikes. And when these gifts don't meet his expectations, he throws a tantrum until his parents buy him something better. And another learned behavior are his eating habits. When he was 14 years old, his parents indulged in his liking for sweets so much that he was wider than he was tall. Which I don't even know how that's possible, but that's what it says in the book. His parents also allowed him to become addicted to TV, putting no limits on how much he could watch. It got to the point that he threw a tantrum when Vernon took them away from their home and Dudley could not watch his shows. Then in the third book, they bought him a brand new TV as a welcome home present for the summer. This made his addiction to both TV and food even worse. They got it for him because he had been complaining about the long walk between the fridge and the television in the living room. Dudley had spent most of the summer in the kitchen, his piggy little eyes fixed on the screen and his 5 chins wobbling as he ate continually. His parents blame everyone but him. When the school reports that Dudley has bullying issues, Petunia cries and says he's a boisterous little boy and that he wouldn't hurt a fly. And when the school nurse reports that he's dangerously overweight, Vernon thinks it's nonsense, again making Dudley the way he is, this time making him think that being dangerously obese is okay. And that's a serious problem, and can be seen as a form of child abuse, which is exactly what Dumbledore was talking about when he called Vernon and Petunia out for what they had done to Dudley. Dudley's childhood is a masterclass in terrible parenting. Vernon and Petunia never say no to him, they never discipline him, and they never teach him about consequences. Again, whenever Dudley acts out, they give him whatever he wants. The result of this is a child who is completely undisciplined and completely incapable of understanding that the world does not revolve around him. And this can be detrimental to a child later in life when they realize that that isn't true. What we have to acknowledge is that Dudley didn't choose to be this way. His parents made him this way. As I theorized earlier in the video, Vernon was probably raised by parents that were bullies, as evidenced by how both he and his sister turned out. This leads to Vernon bullying Harry, and Dudley learns to do the same thing at a very young age. This is the definition of learned behavior, and he learned things not just from Vernon, but Petunia as well. The evidence for this is clear when he called Hogwarts a very specific name, a freak school. The exact word that Petunia had used to describe Hogwarts for years. However, unlike his parents, Dudley was still young, his personality was not yet fully formed, and his worldview was still malleable. The first step that Dudley took to break away from what his parents made him was getting healthy and losing all his weight. Dudley started eating very healthily, and he trained to become a serious boxer. In just 1 year's time, he went from wider than he was tall to being in elite athletic shape. And his eating habits and workouts paid off as Dudley became a boxing champion at a specific level. However, Dudley used this boxing training in immoral ways. Being stronger than ever, he became a violent thug who beat up children every night and smoked cigarettes in the street. One time, Dudley knocked a child out cold for 20 minutes, leading to the neighborhood children being terrified of him. Throughout the books though, there are several moments that force Dudley to confront the reality of magic and the reality of his own cruelty. The first is when he got the pigtail from Hagrid. Then second is when the Weasley twins leave behind a piece of Tauntaun toffee, knowing that Dudley could not resist the candy even if it was dropped on the ground by a stranger, and eating it led to Dudley's tongue growing to an enormous length. And the third run-in with magic is the most noteworthy and the most life-changing one, the Dementor attack. Dementors are creatures that literally suck happiness and hope out of their victims and force you to relive your worst moments. When the Dementor lowered its hood and prepared to perform the Dementor's kiss, literally attempting to suck Dudley's soul out, Dudley was faced with the darkest parts of himself. After the attack, Dudley was traumatized, whimpering, shaking, and vomiting. Harry wondered what a bully like Dudley, who had spent his whole life getting whatever he wanted, would see in his darkest memories. And fascinatingly, we actually know. This is the moment where Dudley's cruelty finally catches up with him. J.K. Rowling later wrote after the series ended that the Dementor made Dudley see himself as he truly was, as the bully that his parents made him. Over the next 2 summers, Dudley gradually became less like his parents. He was still afraid of Harry's power and still didn't understand the magical world, but he stopped bullying Harry. He even became, in his own way, almost kind. One day, Dudley left tea outside of Harry's bedroom door for him. Harry initially thought it was a booby trap because he was so accustomed to Dudley's cruelty, but it wasn't. It was just a kind gesture. By the time we get to the final book, Dudley is changed enough that when the Order of the Phoenix tells him he needs to go into hiding, he agrees. He doesn't argue, and he doesn't complain, unlike how he did in book 1 when he was forced to leave his home and he had a temper tantrum. And that's a great example of his growth over the course of the 7 books. Dudley simply accepts the fact that this is necessary, and he trusts those from the Wizarding world, which his parents have been reluctant to do for all of his life. He was able to get away from the learned behavior of hating the Wizarding world. And this is the complete opposite of how his father responds to all of this. He initially refuses to go with the wizards, and even after finally agreeing, he goes back and forth every 24 hours on whether he was going or not. Which is another thing that shows how different Dudley has become from his father. It's only when Dudley stands up to his mother and father, this time in a genuine way, not in a spoiled or selfish way, and he says he's going with the wizards no matter what they decide to do. And this of course makes the decision for what Petunia and Vernon decide to do. And even more than that, Dudley expresses concern for Harry. He asks where Harry is going, truly worried about his cousin's safety. In their final conversation in the books, Dudley shakes Harry's hand and tells him that he doesn't think he's a waste of space.
I don't think you're a waste of space.
Thanks.
Which doesn't sound too nice, but as Harry said, that basically means I love you coming from Dudley. When Dudley says goodbye to Harry, Harry responds saying,
"See you, Big D."
A nickname that he had used to tease Dudley in the past, but now it was a genuine and bonding nickname for his cousin. Dudley nearly smiled at this exchange, and for the first time, there was genuine warmth between the two of them. Not friendship exactly, but a kind of understanding. A recognition that they were both victims of Mr. and Mrs. Dursley in their own ways, and both were capable of becoming better than them in the end. After the series ended, Rowling revealed that Harry and Dudley's relationship continued, and that they sent Christmas cards to each other every year and occasionally got their kids together. Although she also said that it was extremely awkward for the two of them, not really knowing what to say to the other. But they still put considerable effort into continuing their relationship, and that's really all that matters. Looking at the Dursleys as a whole, Vernon never redeems himself. He remains a bully, a coward, and a bigot until the very end. He never acknowledges his wrongdoings. He never apologizes. He never changes. He is exactly the same as he was from the beginning of the series to the end. Petunia seems for just a moment ready to acknowledge the truth and bridge the gap between herself and Harry, but she can't do it. She's too broken and too damaged by her own choices, and she leaves without saying what she wanted to say. She experiences something close to a redemption, but falls short of actually achieving it. And Dudley actually achieves redemption. He becomes a better person. Not a perfect person, not a hero, but genuinely better. He's kinder, he's more empathetic, and he's a completely different person than he was in the first novel. The Dursley family story is dark, complicated, and deeply human. They embody some of the most damaging stereotypes and behaviors that exist in the real world, and through them, Rowling offers a quiet but powerful warning. They represent the kind of family and the kind of person that no one should ever want to become. Thanks for watching, guys. This video was a lot of work, but so much fun to make. If you enjoyed this video, I have lots of others just like it, like this one where I do a deep dive into the politics and wealth of the Wizarding World, or this one where I do a deep dive into Harry Potter fanfiction, which is a wild one. That's all I have for you guys today though. Thank you so much for watching.